She called me from a gas station bathroom at 2 in the morning, whispering so low I had to press the phone against my ear so hard it left a mark. My daughter, my Iris, 34 years old, a woman who used to climb trees in our backyard and argue with me about baseball scores at the dinner table, reduced to hiding in a gas station bathroom on Route 9 in the middle of the night, whispering to her father because she was afraid he would hear her voice through the walls of their house. "Daddy," she said, just that one word, and I knew. I'd been asleep in my recliner in Dayton, Ohio, the television still on, some late-night program filling the room with noise. I was 63 years old, and my hip had been bothering me since my last shift at the hardware store. I'd been retired 2 years by then, and some nights I still fell asleep in that chair the way I used to after a long day on my feet. When the phone lit up and showed her name, something pulled me awake before the first ring finished. "Daddy, I need you to come, but please don't tell anyone, please." I was in my truck with my coat half on before she finished the sentence. "Before we keep going, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I want to know who's out there." My daughter Iris married Nate Holloway when she was 28. He was handsome in that particular way that makes fathers nervous, the kind of handsome that knows it's handsome. Broad shoulders, easy smile, worked in commercial real estate in Columbus. He had a firm handshake and looked me in the eye and called me sir, and I remember thinking that a man who tries that hard to impress a father is either very good or very good at pretending. I chose to believe the first thing. That was my mistake. Iris moved to Columbus after the wedding. Then came my granddaughter, Penny. 4 years old at the time of that phone call, with brown curls and a gap between her front teeth and a laugh that sounded like something you'd want to record and play back on bad days. I drove up to Columbus every few weeks to see them both, and somewhere around year 2, I started noticing things. The way Iris would check her phone mid-conversation and go quiet. The way she'd start a sentence and then change it, like she'd edited herself in real time. The way Penny would freeze when a car pulled into the driveway. Just for a second, just a flicker. But I saw it. I didn't say anything. That's what I have to live with. I saw the signs and I told myself I was being an overprotective father, an old man who didn't want to admit his little girl had a life that didn't include him. I told myself Iris was fine. Iris was strong. Iris would tell me if something was wrong. She didn't tell me until there was nowhere left to hide. When I pulled into that gas station on Route 9 at 3 in the morning, she was sitting on the curb outside, with Penny asleep against her shoulder, wrapped in a blanket they must have grabbed on the way out the door. Iris had on a sweatshirt despite the November cold, long sleeves, hood up. She looked up when my headlights swept over her, and the expression on her face broke something open in my chest that I don't think ever fully closed again. I got out of the truck without cutting the engine. "Let me see," I said. She shook her head. "Iris." She pulled the sleeve up on her left arm. There were bruises from her wrist to her elbow, old ones and new ones layered like bad weather. I stood very still for a moment. I've learned over the years that the moments when you most want to explode are the moments when you most need to be still. I breathed in the cold night air. I looked at my daughter's arm. I looked at my granddaughter asleep on her shoulder, that little face slack and trusting, completely unaware that her grandfather had just made a decision he would not take back. "Okay," I said, "get in the truck." Penny barely stirred when I buckled her into the back seat. Iris sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. She told me things on that drive back to Dayton that I will not repeat here because they belong to her, not to me. I will only say that by the time we pulled into my driveway, I understood that what Nate Holloway had been doing in that house in Columbus was not a recent development. It had been happening for years. It had started small, the way those things always start small, and it had grown into something that had swallowed my daughter whole while I visited on weekends and accepted his firm handshake and told myself everything was fine. She and Penny slept in the guest room. I sat in my kitchen until the sun came up. I want to tell you that I immediately knew the right thing to do, that I was calm and wise and handled everything perfectly. But the truth is, I sat in that kitchen fighting the ugliest feelings a man can have. The kind of rage that doesn't make you feel powerful. It makes you feel sick. I was angry at Nate Holloway. I was angry at myself. I was angry at all those weekends I drove up and smiled at him and shook his hand and drove home. By the time the coffee finished brewing, I had come back to myself enough to think clearly, and what I thought clearly was this: Nate Holloway was going to believe he still had control of the situation. Men like that always do, and I was going to let him believe it a little while longer. 2 days later, Iris got a call. He was sorry. He was in a bad place with work. He'd get help. He'd already made an appointment. He loved her. He loved Penny. Could they please come home? Iris looked at me across the kitchen table. I looked back at her. Tell him yes, I said quietly. She blinked. Daddy. Tell him yes. Tell him you'll come home Sunday, then let me handle the days between. It took her a long moment. Then she picked up the phone. I spent those 4 days doing 3 things. I talked to a family attorney in Columbus named Karen Ostrowski, who specialized in domestic cases and had a particular way of explaining things that made you feel like the law was actually on your side for once. I gathered every piece of documentation Iris had, medical records from an urgent care visit she'd told them was a fall, a written timeline she put together at my kitchen table over 2 evenings, photographs she'd taken and hidden in a folder on her phone labeled recipes, and I asked my neighbour Floyd, who had done 30 years in family court as a clerk and knew more about protective orders than most lawyers, to walk me through exactly what the process looked like in Franklin County. By Saturday evening, I had a protection order filing ready to go. I had a safety plan. I had Iris's bags repacked and stored in my truck. And I had one more thing. A plan. Nate Holloway did not know that Iris had a father who paid attention. He had seen a quiet old man who came up on weekends, who talked about hardware store anecdotes and Ohio State football, who brought Penny little gifts from the dollar bins at the craft store. A grandfather. Background noise. He had no idea what background noise had been observing. Sunday afternoon, I drove Iris and Penny back to Columbus. Iris sat beside me the way she had as a little girl on long drives, quiet, watching the road, trusting that I knew where we were going. Penny sat in the back with a colouring book, telling me about a dog she wanted to get someday, a big one, a golden one, with a name she hadn't decided yet, but was considering Biscuit. That's a fine name, I told her. Daddy says dogs are dirty, she said without looking up from her colouring. I kept my eyes on the highway. Well, I said, Biscuit can come live with me. She looked up at that and grinned, and I had to work very hard to keep my face even. Nate met us in the driveway. He'd cleaned up, new shirt, fresh haircut, that easy smile deployed at full power. He hugged Iris and she let him, and I watched the way her shoulders stayed rigid the whole time. He shook my hand and said he was glad everything had settled down, and I nodded and said I was glad too, and I looked him right in the eye when I said it. I stayed for dinner. He'd cooked, which surprised me, pasta, garlic bread, a bottle of wine he opened with the confidence of a man who thought the worst was behind him. He talked about work. He asked me about Dayton. Penny sat beside me and showed me her colouring pages, and at one point she leaned against my arm the way she used to when she was smaller, and I felt that weight, and I thought, not much longer, baby girl. Around 9, I said I should head back before it got too late on the highway. Nate walked me to the door, that handshake again, that eye contact that was really just performance. I appreciate you bringing them home, he said. Family takes care of each other, I said. I went to my truck. I drove 2 blocks. I parked on a side street and called Karen Ostrowski. We're ready, I said. While I'd been sitting at that dinner table eating Nate Holloway's pasta, Karen had been coordinating with a domestic violence advocate and the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, submitting the emergency protection order that Iris had signed before we left Dayton. I was not there to witness Nate's face when the officers knocked on his door that night. Iris told me about it later, quietly, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. He'd gone very still, she said, like a machine that had been switched off. He looked at me, she said, and I think that was the first time he actually saw me. Not who he decided I was, me. The protection order barred him from the house and from contact with Iris or Penny. He was served with divorce papers the following morning. His attorney would later tell Karen that he was shocked, that he hadn't seen it coming, that he had believed everything was resolved. That is what happens when you let someone believe they are still in control. But here is where I have to tell you about Nate's mother, because this story is not just about one man. Roberta Holloway was 71 years old and lived 40 minutes outside Columbus in a house that she had inherited from her late husband and decorated entirely according to her own taste, which ran heavily toward framed inspirational quotes and ceramic roosters. She drove a white Buick and went to church every Sunday and presented herself to the world as a genteel woman of deep faith and family values. She had known what her son was doing. Iris had told her, once early on, when she still believed that talking to family might help. Roberta had listened very carefully, and then she had told Iris that marriage required sacrifice, that all men had their ways, and that Iris needed to consider what kind of wife she was being before she made accusations that could destroy a family. She had told Iris to pray about it. There was also Nate's younger sister, a woman named Gwendolyn, who lived 15 minutes away and who had appointed herself the family's information officer. She called Nate after every family gathering to report what she'd observed. She had told him when Iris seemed off, when she'd seen Iris on the phone looking upset, when she'd noticed Iris's car wasn't in the driveway on a Tuesday afternoon. She was not violent. She was something in some ways more efficient. She was his surveillance system. After the protection order was served, both women went to work. Roberta called Iris's phone 17 times in 2 days. She left voicemails that began with prayer and ended with accusations. She showed up at Penny's preschool claiming she was picking her up early, a grandmother's privilege, she said, until the director, who had already been briefed, told her firmly that Penny was not available for pickup without prior authorization from a parent. Gwendolyn started a different kind of campaign. She sent messages to mutual friends. She posted vague things on social media about family betrayal and women who destroy good men. She called my daughter's closest friend from college. How she got that number, I still don't know, and told her that Iris was having a breakdown, that the divorce was based on lies, that Nate was devastated. Iris showed me the messages. She sat across from me and her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear this time, but from the particular exhaustion of watching people you once trusted work so hard to bury you. "What do we do?" she asked. I thought about it. "We let them," I said. She looked at me. "We let them keep going," I said, "and we document every single thing they do." Karen Ostrowski had already told us that a pattern of harassment following a protection order was admissible, that contact attempts, especially repeated ones, could result in contempt charges. That witness tampering, and what Gwendolyn was doing to Iris's friend was walking that line, had its own consequences. So we did nothing. We documented. We saved the voicemails. We screenshot the social media posts. Iris's friend, bless her, kept the text message conversation from Gwendolyn and forwarded it to Karen in its entirety. It was Roberta who finally went too far. 3 weeks after the protection order was served, Iris came out of a grocery store in Columbus to find Roberta standing beside her car, not approaching, just standing there, watching. Iris got in her car and locked the door and called me. I told her to drive directly to the nearest police precinct, not home, and to tell them what she'd just seen. The officer who took her statement noted that this was the 3rd reported contact violation in 11 days. Nate was called in. His attorney sat beside him looking tired. The judge was not a dramatic person. She spoke in a flat, measured voice that somehow made everything she said land harder. She looked at the documentation Karen laid out, the voicemails, the school incident, the grocery store surveillance. She looked at Nate. She asked him if he had asked his family to stop contacting his estranged wife. He said he had tried. She said she would like to see evidence of that. There wasn't any. The contempt finding was not a surprise. What was a surprise, at least to Nate and his family, was the speed of what followed. Family courts in Ohio move slowly when there is dispute and quickly when there is documentation. Iris had 2 years of medical records, a timeline, photographs, and 11 days of post-order contact violations, clearly attributed to people acting in coordination with the person she was divorcing. The custody hearing went the way Karen said it would go when the paperwork is good. Iris was awarded primary custody of Penny. Nate received supervised visitation, contingent on completion of a batterer's intervention program. Robert and Gwendolyn were issued a formal no-contact order. I was sitting in the hallway of the courthouse when Iris came out. She had Karen on one side and the advocate on the other, and she was holding Penny's hand. My granddaughter was wearing her rain boots, the yellow ones with the ducks on the side, because Iris had told her the courthouse might have puddles outside, and Penny had taken this information very seriously. Iris looked at me across that hallway. I don't have words for what passed between us in that moment. I know that sounds like a thing people say when they don't want to be specific, but I genuinely don't. Some things don't resolve into language. A father and a daughter in a courthouse hallway on the other side of something. That's all I can give you. Penny let go of her mother's hand and ran to me, and I caught her and held her, and she said, "Grandpa." There were no puddles, but I wore the boots anyway, and I said that was exactly the right decision, and she seemed satisfied with that. The divorce was finalized 5 months later. Iris and Penny moved back to Dayton for a year while Iris rebuilt. She found work with a non-profit that I won't name, but I will tell you it was work that mattered, and she was good at it. She found an apartment with a backyard small enough to manage and big enough for a dog. Penny named the dog Biscuit. I am not remotely surprised. Roberta Holloway sent Iris a letter 6 months after the no-contact order expired. 1 page, handwritten. I don't know exactly what it said because Iris chose not to show it to me, which is her right. What she told me was that it did not include an apology, not a real one, the kind that cost something. It included an explanation. She said she read it once and put it in a drawer and went and played with Penny in the backyard. That, I told her, was the right decision. I want to tell you something now, man to man, or person to person, whoever you are listening to this tonight. I spent 63 years thinking of myself as a patient man, a steady man, the kind of father who shows up and stays calm and doesn't make things worse. And I believe that patience was the right tool in this situation. The documentation, the coordination, the legal process, that was the path that actually protected my daughter and my granddaughter, and I know it. I would choose it again. But I also have to be honest with you about what patience costs. There were nights in that kitchen in Dayton, in the months between Iris's call from the gas station and the day the divorce was finalized, when I sat with a cold cup of coffee and felt things I am not proud of feeling. I am human, and there are limits. What I want to say to any father, any parent, any person listening who has a child out there in a situation like this is the following. Do not wait for the phone call from the gas station bathroom. The signs are there earlier. The edited sentences, the checked phone, the frozen child in the driveway. You know what you're seeing. Trust it. Say something. Ask directly, not in a way that pushes them away, but in a way that opens the door. Sometimes they just need to know the door is open before they can walk through it. And to anyone who is in that house right now, hiding in a bathroom, editing your sentences, waiting, I want you to hear this. You are not protecting anyone by staying silent. You are only giving more time to something that does not deserve more time. There are people who will help you. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Tell one person you trust. Your silence is not strength. It is not sacrifice. It is something that has been taken from you without your permission, and you can take it back. I know because I watched my daughter do it. At 34 years old, in a gas station parking lot in November, with her daughter asleep on her shoulder and her father's headlights sweeping across her face. She was terrified and exhausted, and she did it anyway. That kind of courage doesn't make the news. It doesn't get recorded. But I have seen it, and I'm telling you it is real, and it is possible, and it is yours if you want it. Penny turns 6 next month. She has opinions about everything now, which is exactly how it should be. She has informed me that Biscuit needs a friend, that her favorite color is all of them, and that when she grows up she wants to be a veterinarian, or possibly a chef, or possibly both at the same time. I told her that sounded right to me. Iris is doing the kind of okay that is actually okay, not the performed kind. She calls me on Sundays. She argues with me about football again. Last month she beat me at Scrabble and was insufficiently humble about it. I am not telling you this story because everything is healed. Healing is slower than a story. I'm telling it because silence has weight, and I carried mine for too long, and I don't want you to do the same. Tell me in the comments. When was a time someone stood up for you? Or when were you the one who finally decided to stand up? I read every single one. Every story you leave here matters to me. And if someone in your life needs to hear this tonight, share it with them. You might be the open door they've been looking for. I think about that gas station parking lot more than I probably should. The way Iris looked up when my headlights hit her face. The way Penny was asleep on her shoulder like nothing in the world was wrong. Because children trust sleep the way adults can't anymore. I've replayed that moment hundreds of times, and every time I arrive at the same uncomfortable place, I should have been there sooner. Not that night specifically, years sooner. The signs were there and I chose comfortable explanations over honest ones, and that is something I have to carry. What I've learned, really learned, not just the version you tell yourself to feel better, is that doing right by the people you love is not a feeling. It's a series of decisions that cost you something. It cost me sleep. It cost me 4 days of patience when every instinct I had was screaming at me to do something loud and immediate and satisfying. It cost me the ease of pretending my daughter's marriage was fine because she hadn't said otherwise. Goodness is not passive. It is not just the absence of cruelty. It is active and deliberate, and sometimes it looks like sitting in a kitchen at 5 a.m, deciding to be smarter than your anger. The thing that actually protected Iris wasn't my fists or my fury, as much as part of me wanted to use both. It was clarity. It was Karen Ostrowski with a filing ready to go. It was Iris's phone folder labeled recipes that turned out to hold 2 years of evidence. It was understanding that Nate Holloway and his mother and his sister had built their power on the assumption that the people they were hurting were too frightened or too isolated to think clearly. The moment we started thinking clearly, their whole structure began to collapse from the inside. You cannot outmaneuver someone who is calm and prepared and keeping records. That's not a dramatic lesson. It won't make a good movie, but it is the truth. And Iris. I want to say something about my daughter specifically because this story belongs to her more than it belongs to me. What she did took a kind of courage I don't think I fully understood until I watched her do it. She was terrified. She was exhausted. She had been told for years, in ways loud and quiet, that she was not capable of surviving without the structure that was hurting her. And she made that phone call anyway. She sat across from me at my kitchen table for 2 evenings and wrote down every date, every incident, every doctor's visit she'd coded as something else. She stood in a courthouse hallway in a building that intimidated her. And she held Penny's hand and she walked through it. That is not a small thing. That is a person deciding that their own life is worth the effort of saving, and I have never been more proud of anything in my 63 years than I was of watching her make that decision. Penny named the dog Biscuit. She goes to school. She laughs at things the way a 6-year-old is supposed to laugh, like it's the best thing that's ever happened to her, every single time. That is the result, not the courtroom. Not the contempt finding. That laugh is the result, and it was worth every hard thing it took to get there. If you are carrying something heavy right now, something you haven't told anyone, I want you to know that clarity is available to you, not all at once, but one honest conversation, one person you trust, one decision to stop explaining away what you're seeing. That's how it starts. That's how Iris started. That's how it can start for you.